So this week we're talking about evolution and cultural evolution. So I just wanted to use this video to very quickly um, kind of review or run through Dr. Wesch's chapter 3 on evolution and human potential. Hopefully you're getting a sense of um, the basic, the broad picture of what it means to be human, um, and how we might go about investigating it. Um, Again, we are kind of building off of the textbook in our own way, so not necessarily only staying there. So just real quickly, this is of course a topic that could take a whole semester to go through and often does for many who major in this topic. Um, but I think it's good to know the basics, thinking about how humans evolved. Um, so really thinking, he kind of describes first, the furthest back, 20 million years ago. Um, yeah, right about there, right? Speciation among primates, is kind of due to isolation or geographic and reproductive isolation. So different primate species begin to evolve as they become isolated from each other. Again, talking about over millions of years. So as they kind of adapt to their environmental niches, they kind of branch off from each other. Uh, so some of this is about the passage of time. Some of it is about the changing environment as we go kind of through the Little Ice Age, about this era, uh, or successive Little Ice Ages. Um, in the years following the death of the dinosaurs. Hopefully, you understand a little bit of your evolutionary history, how mammals evolved, that sort of thing. I'm making a lot of assumptions there, but he's kind of drilling in on us, on primates, um, and again, skipping a whole lot of things. And so it is a very fascinating story to think about our ancestors in that way. Um, he talks about 6 million years ago, the kind of emergence of the ability to walk upright or bipedalism. Humans essentially, quote unquote, coming down from the trees, he says. So as forests are shrinking, the earth is cooling again. Excuse me. Um, these once forests become kind of woodlands and grasslands, prairie lands, um, and humans begin to sort of climb down from the trees and learn to survive in the prairies. Um, though, of course, not fully forgetting what it's like to be a primate, or as they had for millions of years before. So some of that is sort of gaining new things, changing, but carrying traits with you. Again, I'm talking this very, very broadly and not in any sort of specialistic way. Um, so monkeys evolving at first to eat. He mentions eating unripe fruit, and uh, as humans, or as they become human and come down from trees, they need a new strategy, need to find more diverse food sources. So this kind of leads to a lot of different practices, like bipedalism, like collaborating. And you'll see in the videos for this week, this sort of early attempts to communicate through singing, that sort of thing. Um, as time kind of speeds on, and we begin to develop uh, kind of larger capacity to store fat. Again, trying to adapt to being down from the trees, and eating different things now, trying to adapt to, um, again, all of this in Africa, of course, adapt to situations where is not enough food or not enough resources. Um, and our body's beginning to change because of that. So over millions of years, we lose our fur, we develop sweat glands and the capacity to store fat in our bodies to keep us cool, or excuse me, sweat glands to keep us cool, and fat capacity to keep us fed essentially, keep our bodies running. And running we do begin to do. So he talks about, again, 5 million or half a million years later, excuse me, our bodies begin to kind of get a new sense for living in the plains. Our legs become longer, our toes shorter, our arms shorter. We kind of have a greater separation of our head and shoulders, and we begin to create kind of evolve adaptations to run, to move quickly in order to survive, in order to hunt on the plains. And he has an interesting passage about hunting without spears, so he really goes into more detail. I'm just trying to understand the basics, understanding how we're adapting to our environments, changing from our sort of primate cousins, right, over millions of years. And the ensuing 1.5 million plus years after this kind of goes very slowly, but we do eventually um, begin to get better at obtaining food, which gives us more calories to grow our brains in a sense. So 500,000 years ago, really in the last 500,000 years, we've really come a long way in a sense. So first with the spear, then fire and cooking, and then we really kind of scientists describe us as anatomically a new species, as Homo sapiens, only just 200,000 years ago. And then things really begin to pick up, as he describes, in the creative explosion 50,000 years ago. So, kind of developing into the Stone Age, where we have stone tools, kind of newer ways of organizing ourselves. And in all of this, in asking questions about how to help us survive, trying to solve these problems, trying new things, we're, in that sense, we began to invent culture, this concept that we've been talking about. Um, so again, I wish we had more time to go into more detail, um, but it's hard to describe, this sort of immense potential and change that we underwent, as well as the immense amount of time that this happened. So for most of our history, we lived in certain ways, as nomadic hunter-gatherers, as most of us know, and none of this is even getting to the agricultural revolution, which has only kind of happened in the last 10 to 12,000 years. So before any of that, when we were still sort of in tribe-like bands, um, we began in surviving on the plains, invent culture. And then Dr. Wesh kind of jumps ahead in another section to talk about how all of this brings us to a moment where our evolutionary traits and tendencies are mismatched with our current way of living. So in the last 200 years only, we've developed in a certain way of life that is often incompatible or detrimental with our actual evolutionary biological tendencies. So he talks about mismatched diseases that are more and more prevalent, thinking about sort of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, all ailments coming from this discrepancy between how we evolved versus the environments we're now in. So he talks about, there's too much fat and sugar in our diet, too little, we're too sedentary. He talks about that we're not necessarily psychologically or socially adapted yet to how complex our social networks are and the economic pressures we live under, etc. So um, if if there's this underlying sense that in human society right now of unease, perhaps maybe some of it could be attributed to this discrepancy, this mismatch. Um, and he talks about, our addictive habit cycles. So it's really about these biological tools that were useful for hundreds of thousands, for millions of years, that have now gone haywire. But he kind of ends on a positive note, as he does throughout the book. There is the real moral of the story is that we can build new habits, right? That we can learn new things, um, and that we can challenge ourselves uh, to create ourselves based on an adaptation to our environment. Um, so whether you agree with him or not, uh, he ends on a positive note, and I'll end there.